Hello. Happy Halloween weekend. I had a Halloween party yesterday that I worked 13 hours in, which is why I was busy this whole weekend. But it was so fun. So I hope you guys are having a good time too. Um, this week we're diving a little bit more into humans and how humans are sort of adapting to the world and how the world is adapting to humans. And we're doing that through population ecology and population growth. Right? Because maybe you have heard that human population is increasing dramatically, and we're going to talk about that, why that is, what is what is the problem with uh, humans growing at that rate, and maybe how to fix that. Man, we're not really going to fix it, but um, it'll fix on its own, and we'll see why. So let me show my screen. La 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 la. You may go away. Thank you. Away from current stuff. Okay, so this week we're talking community, and this module, I guess, because you have 2 weeks. We're talking community and population ecology. I'm really excited about this topic, actually. I got really stoked about it. Not only did I find a really cool lab to do, which I'm very excited about, we'll talk about that at the end. And your homework assignment will be pretty fun. I'll talk about that at the end too. But I actually didn't know that much about community and population ecology. Uh, and I think I relearned a lot of concepts just making this presentation. So it was really fascinating for me. And it was really fun. So that being said, let's start by giving the objectives. I'm actually just going to skip this. I'll let you read this on your own if you want, because we'll go through it all in the process. But I guess let's then start with defining what a population even is, right? So it's a group of organisms, human, animal, plant, bacteria, of the same species that live in the same area. The statistical study of populations is called demography, a set of mathematical tools designed to describe populations and investigate how they change. So then how do we measure population density? There are a couple different ways, and actually part of your lab does this, and I'm really excited about it. Oh, hopefully you're not seeing that. That's annoying. Perfect. Well, we need to go here. So I have done this in person, not necessarily as like a big thesis document or anything, but I am familiar with how one of the major ways that we do measure population density and population, population density, that's the word, is this method. So I've worked in marine science for 3 years now, but I've been a geologist for 5 or 6. I don't even know. But marine science this is what we do as marine scientists a lot of times is we measure the population densities at different times of the year, different seasons, different times of the day, even tidally. We look at species up on the intertidal zone during low tide, after high tide, etc. And so I have taken kiddos out. I worked in marine outreach and education, and we take kids out and we taught them how to measure a population density of the organisms on a beach. And we do that using this uh, tool here. It's called a quadrat, and it's lined up against this measuring tape. So we put out a specific length of measuring tape. I think we did like 100 meters in this particular case along the beach. We do it perpendicular to the beach. So like, come back. So here's the line of the waves. We would put this measuring tape out this way. And we'd put the quadrats, I think we did like 4 or 5 with the kiddos along this measuring tape. And that gave us an objective take on the beach. We just set the tape out randomly. And I think in a real scientific study, you set out like 10 or 20 of these measuring tapes. And then you set out 5 or 6 quadrats per measuring tape, essentially. And what you do with this quadrat is it's also broken down into even smaller boxes. So the quadrat itself, it varies. You have to write it obviously in your document, whatever you're using to collect that data. But a lot of times it's like a foot by a foot or 3 feet by 3 feet. It has to be very specific, right? And then within that, it's broken up into smaller quadrats, I guess, or squares. And what we did with the kiddos was we were essentially like identify and name the organisms that you find within each square. in scientific data, we would count. So if we were looking for a species of snail, if we were studying a species of snail, we would count, okay, 1 in this box, 3 in this box, 6 in this box, 1 in this box, 0 in this box, etc., right? But in this case, I think we were like, what do you see? Because we were trying to get them to identify some of the organisms too. So they're like, oh, there's seaweed, there's clams, there's barnacles. Either way, it's still a scientific study. Theirs was just a lot more broad, obviously. But if you're looking into a singular species, a single population, you're using one of these. And then what you do is you average all of those out. So you've taken, right, you've gone out and you've taken hundreds of these measurements. If you're doing an actual scientific study, you've taken hundreds of these measurements along a very specific measurement of beach. So like maybe you studied a mile of the beach, right? Or maybe the beach is only a mile long, whatever. And then you do the math and you extrapolate by multiplying these quadrats and what you found, the average of what you found in these quadrats, to combine the whole beach. So that way you can say, well, I found 200 snails in here, which means that based on the area of this beach, there's probably 20,000 snails on this beach. And then you can extrapolate even further into other beaches that are close by that would hold that organism, and thus sort of determine how much in that bay those snails are. And actually, they're doing that now down in Padilla Bay, which if you have looked at your environmental science project, which I hope you have, one of the topics that I have recommended as an idea is there's an invasive species, the mud snail down in Padilla Bay, and they've been doing that with the mud snail to see. And they do it, I think, seasonally to see, A, if they're coming back every season, but they're also realizing that this species is growing out of control. They're an invasive species. So that's how that's one method of measuring populations. Yeah. But there are different types of populations too and how they're distributed, right? So a random distribution would be these flowers. Flowers don't grow in a specific order. They grow based on where a bird poops a seed out, right? Or where wind takes a dandelion seed. So they're incredibly random, these plants. And that is a difficult way it's difficult to measure a random distribution, but it is possible. A clumped distribution here, we've got these elephants. They move in herds, right? And so these guys are clumped and they move in different herds. Another type of species that I'm very passionate about, of course, that move in herds or pods, I should say, are orcas. So we do a lot of research on orcas in this area because they're very dominant they're a dominant species in this area. They're important to native tribes. And to us as a community, they're very important. And our local orcas in the Puget Sound, Salish Sea area are endangered. So we do a lot of species density, population density measuring with a clumped pod regularly. And then uniform. This was really interesting to me. I actually didn't know this about penguins, but penguins are super territorial. So they maintain a defined area for nesting. So they're called a uniform species distribution. I did not know that. Fun fact. So these are 3 different types of species distribution and how we recognize how these species are sort of spread out. Think about what you think humans are. We'll kind of come back to it. I think it's a complicated answer. Okay. Demography. To be honest, I do not know if it is pronounced demography or demography. Demography sounds better, so that's what I've been going with. But like demograph, that's how you say it without the Y. Anyways, I digress. It's 8 o'clock at night, you guys. So it's the study of the dynamics in a population. The statistical study of population changes over time because of birth rates, death rates, and then life expectancies. So this table here was concocted to detail the life table of a Dall Mountain sheep. And we're looking at different age ranges of these sheeps. So from 0 to 5, this is newborn, and then it goes all the way to 14 years. So clearly the highest measurement we've ever taken of a sheep is 14, because we would go higher if we'd had any higher. And then this list here tells us how many of those have died in that age interval. So what we're seeing is 145 died within 0.5 to 1 year old. So baby sheep are dying at 145. And these are natural deaths. These aren't human slaughtering for lamb or whatever. But then we're also seeing higher abundance up here, from 8 to 9, all the way to 11. So, go back from 8 to 11, right? So we don't see a lot of deaths from 1 to 8. So they're either dying really early off or they're dying when they're older. Why is that? I'm so glad you asked. Oh, and then, I don't know if I care about the last three tables. I think what I wanted to point out was those two columns here. You can read the other two. It's in your textbook. So what does that mean? That doesn't go into that. Okay. We will. You know what? I'll follow up later on because I know where I'm going with this, but it's not the next slide. Okay. Then we're going to talk about survivorship curves. So it's a graph of the number of individuals surviving at each age interval versus time. These curves allow us to compare the life histories of different populations. And there are three types of curves, as you can see on this beautiful depiction here from your textbook. So type 1 curve, that's us. Mortality is relatively low in the early and middle years, and it really starts to occur faster in older individuals. And what we're seeing here too, I don't know how accurate this graph is, or if they were just like, we want a pretty picture. But what we're seeing is that is a rapid acceleration of, okay, they're going to hit a certain age, which means we're going to start to really exponentially decline the possibility of their death, right? Type 2 curve, mortality is relatively constant throughout their entire lifespan, and mortality is equally likely to occur at any point in the lifespan. So birds, a lot of them don't make it at birth, and a lot of them die throughout their life by being hunted, or just sickness, illness, and then they're going to die at the end of life too. They also don't, oh, wait, I'm going to come back to that. Type 3 curve, early ages, so this is like a tree. Early ages experience the highest mortality with much lower mortality rates for organisms that make it to advanced years. So what that's saying is we have a lot of death occurring with young trees and young plants. But as soon as they hit a certain age, which also correlates with how high they're able to grow, they're able to survive and they have a higher likelihood of surviving longer. And what I want you to think about, which I stopped myself from saying earlier, was think about how many offspring humans have each time they give birth. Think about how many offspring birds have. Think about how many offspring trees can have. Because that's going to significantly change sort of these curves if they have a different chance of living because of the amount of offspring they can or are capable of having, right? Humans might have maybe 2 babies each time. 2 is, and that's a lot. It's usually 1, right? Birds lay 3 to 4 eggs. And depending on the bird species, they could lay more. We're not counting ostriches. But like tree birds, these are going to live, or these have a consistent lifespan because they're they're laying like 5 eggs. And some of those are not surviving immediately. And then trees, they're spewing out those seeds. They have hundreds, if not millions of babies every year that are in the form of little seeds. So think about that. And why that is changing this survivorship curve, right? Also think about the fact that humans take care of their children, well, hopefully take care of their children, because there's only 1/2. I'm a twin, so that's why I keep saying 2. My poor parents. And then birds are taking care of 5 babies, and they have to feed 5 babies, and sometimes they have to make a really difficult decision of, I don't have enough food. Which child is the weakest? Well, I'm just going to let this child die so I can save my other babies. And then trees, of course, have actually no interaction at all with their babies, so they're not going to take care of them as they grow and perhaps die. Okay. So now let's look at population types. There we go. We have 2 different kinds of growths that we see with populations. We see either the exponential growth, that's here, and we see logistical growth down here. So do I talk about it again? It's fine. In exponential growth, we're looking at theoretical populations that increase in numbers without any limits to their growth. Bacteria can grow this way. I feel like flies also grow like this too, or reproduce like this. Maybe not. Maybe I'm being dramatic. My house is filled with fruit flies, but bacteria grow this way. So if division takes about an hour and 1,000 bacteria are placed in a large flask and they divide in half for 2 bacteria every hour, We're going to go from 1,000 to 2,000 to 4,000, 8,000, etc. And it's going to double each time. And that number gets so big so quickly before these guys are dying that they grow exponentially. So what they're saying is there's no death really happening in this time of growth because they're doubling and doubling and doubling and doubling, and no death. And death does happen eventually, but at the rate that it is able to duplicate, it's faster than these things are dying off. So we see this exponential growth. It's going from a little bit, and all of a sudden, so much, and so much, and so much, right? And then we see logistic growth, sorry. And these are limits to reproductive growth that become more intense as the population size increases. Exponential growth cannot continue indefinitely because organisms die. Like I was saying, you're going to see death eventually. So when the population grows large enough, resources are going to deplete and the growth rate is going to slow down. And that's sort of where we're going to talk, of what we're going to talk about today. It's morbid. It's kind of sad. It's our reality right now. But this is the biggest issue with population growth, is a lack of resources, right? So this is what we're seeing humans do. We started out small. We were the prey for so many things. And then we'll talk about when this happened, this exponential growth. And then we are starting to level off. We'll talk about that a little bit too, to our carrying capacity. So what's a carrying capacity? I have these flying in. That's annoying. Sorry, I wanted them to fly in really nicely. So the population size, which is determined by the maximum population size that a particular environment can sustain, it represents the largest number of individuals that can be supported without harm to the given individual and its environment. So in real populations, a growing population often overshoots its carrying capacity or right below it, but most populations actually fluctuate around the carrying capacity in an undulating fashion rather than existing at it. So what we're saying here is this level here, whatever it is in population size, this is the most that I guess, and I'm like really getting ahead of myself today, but you know what? It's fine. So our environment as humans is just the world, right? We've taken over the world. We live in almost every continent, even some people down in Antarctica, but they're crazy. I did have a dream for a while of going to Antarctica, but I've watched too many documentaries about it that I'm like, no, thank you. So we have people that live on almost every continent, right? And so we have taken over the entire world. Our carrying capacity of the entire world is only going to be as much as it can be with the resources that we have. So at some point, that's going to plateau off. So here's yeast, a microscopic fungus used for bread or beer, and it exhibits this S-shaped curve when grown in a test tube. So its growth levels off as the population depletes the nutrients that are necessary for its growth. I've never made bread before, but I have friends who make a lot of bread. What they're saying here is we see an increase in yeast because they're splitting to make that bread rise before you bake it, right? And then eventually that bread's going to stop rising because the yeast stops reproducing and it levels off. That is our carrying capacity. Harbor seals, this one was particularly fascinating to me because we also live in an area that holds an abundance of harbor seals. We are an environment that maintains a lot of really beautiful creatures, including these beautiful little guys. Ours are more brown than this. I think this might have been an Oregon harbor seal, but we have some brown harbor seals in Washington that are stunning. But the population size exceeded the carrying capacity for short periods of time. And so what happens is it falls a little bit below the carrying capacity. And the fluctuation in their population size will continue to occur as the population oscillates around its carrying capacity. So what that's saying is, for some reason in the 80s, these guys exploded in population. And then they teetered off because there were so many harbor seals, they weren't able to feed their young. There wasn't enough food for them to get nutrients for them to feed their young. So their babies began to die. I know it's sad. I'm really sorry. And they began to die because there wasn't enough food for all of the harbor seals. So their population actually slipped back under the carrying capacity. But that moment that sort of hit, that was like, oh shoot, all these harbor seals are starting to die. That was their carrying capacity. That was when we knew, okay, there cannot be any more harbor seals because they're dying of lack of food. And of course, there's this system of balance of like, can we introduce more fish into the system? And that gets convoluted and problematic in a lot of ways. Although they did do this with Monterey Bay. Monterey Bay in California, beautiful area. Highly recommend visiting if you've never been. So they have a beautiful kelp forest. We also have kelp forests here. They're a little bit more out in the Sound. Um, and sea urchins, which are like the spiny little circle blob things. They track around on 2 feet. They eat algae. They eat kelp. They eat seaweed. And so um, they were reaching a capacity, but they were also proving to be problematic because they were eating all the kelp. So we introduced more sea otters into that area, and the sea otters eat the urchins. So that was actually an example of really good balance of releasing an animal into a new ecosystem. There were sea otters there already, but we introduced even more to sort of help that system, and now it maintains a good balance. But that was iffy. I know we're introducing like gray wolves back into Yellowstone. We're introducing, I don't know if it's I think it's grizzlies into the North Cascades, which is just up the hill. Um, and so that will sort of change our ecosystems. And we'll look at the carrying capacity of those animals here soon. But that's our carrying capacity. Sorry, I keep getting very digressy here. Um, so density dependent regulation. Usually the denser a population is, the greater its mortality rate. So this is a graph. Boop, I'm sorry. I keep my face up here, by the way. I was just talking about this with someone because I've had to watch a lot of videos myself. And sometimes you don't see the teacher, and that's fine. But I like that you guys have this connection with my face. You're welcome. Because I just feel like it gets really disconnected if you're sharing a screen, but you don't see their face. And that way I can show you my cats too. Look, there's Harry. I'll do it on the big screen when I get done with my PowerPoint. Okay, so this graph shows a high density population. So we're looking at a mortality rate of high. I guess it's starting out high. And we're looking at a low density population. And they share the same shape, right? But what we're seeing is this, I actually don't know why the mortality rate starts out. Oh, because they're infants. I see. Okay. And then this is the age of the person, the human, right? So what we're seeing is in a high density population, a lot more babies are dying, like I mentioned with the seals. Oh, and it says here too, because of maternal malnutrition, because there is a shortage of food for mothers to eat, so they cannot feed their babies, and babies obviously have a very strict diet of boob milk or formula. And so they're dying very fast because they're not getting the nutrients that they need in a high density population. Like imagine going to the grocery store during COVID, right? And everybody was going to the grocery store, and they all got toilet paper because there were so many people. All that toilet paper was gone. But as soon as you maybe left town and you went to a smaller area, you could get toilet paper because there wasn't as many people vying for the same resource. It's the same situation, but with food, which is probably more important and less ridiculous. So we're seeing that with higher density populations, anybody over 10 and a half, we have a higher mortality rate, which is sad. It's kind of scary. Oh, and this is just donkeys. But it is the same with humans. Okay, density independent regulation. So this is not dependent on the density of a population. So there are other factors that are typically physical in nature that cause mortality of a population regardless of its density. Weather, natural disasters, pollution. A dense population that suffers mortality from a density independent cause will be able to recover differently than a sparse population. So they gave the example of population of deer affected by a harsh winter will recover faster if there are more deer remaining to reproduce. But my favorite example of something like this, so on Earth, I mentioned I'm a geologist. On Earth, we have had 5 mass extinctions. And there were obviously before humans were here, they were all caused from natural disasters. And yes, that includes comets and meteorites. Not comets. It's fine. I digress again. But meteorites striking the Earth, that is a natural event, natural disaster. But there were also a few mass extinctions that occurred. I don't remember exactly which ones they were, But there's two that we do not have any evidence as to necessarily how it happened. We have theories, we have hypotheses, but we haven't found any like meteorite craters. We haven't found the like chemical evidence that we have found with like the Chicxulub crater in Mexico that caused the dinosaur extinction. We haven't found that with some of the others, but what we think happened was an increase in volcanic activity that increased the CO2 of the atmosphere, which is weirdly what's happening now, except now it's happening at a faster rate than it did in the past. And there were a couple other events that occurred from high CO2, high oxygen. Before we really fully oxygenated, there were a lot of organisms on Earth that hadn't fully adapted to oxygen. So they actually ended up dying when we had a whole bunch of oxygen just appear in the atmosphere. They're like, nope, I don't breathe this. I breathe CO2. So these events can cause the death. But some of them, as we've talked about with adaptations and evolution, some of them were able to survive. And so if you have a small population that can survive, they're able to fully recover, which is pretty cool. And actually, this theory in and of itself gives me hope for climate change. I have this sort of morbid thought that, you know, humans, we're going to kill ourselves off. It might not be in the next 100 years, but it might be in the next 1,000. And I have this very like lethargic thought that's Earth's going to come back. She's going to be just fine. The trees will come back. There'll be new ecosystems. Humans might kill ourselves off, but Earth will come back because populations will come back. We are resilient. Earth is resilient. We are too. So another one of their examples were woolly mammoths. Woolly mammoths began to go extinct about 10,000 years ago. Soon after paleontologists believe humans were able to hunt them and colonize North America. So these guys were found in northern North America, Canada. We found them as far as, well, I guess I haven't studied woolly mammoths in my entirety, but I know there was one down at Oregon State University. They just dug out of the football field. So there was one down in mid and central Oregon. But climate change and human hunting led to their extinction. And I brought this up because these are factors that aren't attributed to their density. This had to do with outlying factors, including climate change, and then humans, because we ruin everything. Demographic-based population model. Okay, I wasn't sure if I defined model. I know I talked models in climate change too, and I don't know that I ever really, I guess I kind of talked about what they were, but I really wanted to define what a model was before I got crazy. So a model is a mathematical based principle that we have extrapolated data from the data that we already have. So when we looked at the Keeling curve in climate change, we can extrapolate that curve based on all of those factors of the feedbacks that we have, right? And I talked about how models don't necessarily have all the information regarding feedbacks because there's so many feedbacks. So a model just helps extrapolate that data so we have a sense of the future, right? And I had a teacher try to say there is no such thing as a perfect model. We're never going to have a perfect model, but it gives us a sense of what to expect based on the data we already have. And here, again, I'm just all over the place tonight. Population ecologists have hypothesized that suites of characteristics may evolve in species that lead to a particular adaptation to their environments. Going into the human population. That's where this was going. Until the Middle Ages, human populations were held in check by diseases, famines, and wars, and thus grew very slowly. It took all of human history to reach 1 billion humans, which is crazy. It took 150 years after that to reach 3 billion. And it took 12 years to go from 5 to 6 billion. We have tripled our population during the 20th century. Why? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Here is the timeline of human population. So here we have population in billions, which is nice. So we have 1 billion, 2 billion, etc. And we can look back as far as 50,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago, in the old Stone Age. Here it is. Now we're in the new Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. So we're looking at BC. Oh, this is AD. So this is the start of our common era. And right after that were the Middle Ages. And I love that there's a dip here with the plague. So the plague killed like, oh God, 500 million? Oh yeah, look at that. It's almost, so it killed almost 500 million people. 400 million? Because it's not quite a half. Doesn't matter. It killed a lot. It killed a lot of people. The plague killed a lot of people. So there was a downfall in human population then, and we came back from it. We rise, and then the Industrial Revolution hit. When I think of the Industrial Revolution, I think of big machines and Henry Ford building the car that he built and all those other things. But you also have to remember that with this new technology came medical technology, came OBGYN technology, came the benefits that allowed humans to grow to later ages. So all of a sudden, our lifespans went from, I don't know, 50 years, 60 years to 100, right? So all of a sudden, we saw this huge boost in human population after this industrial revolution. And now we're sitting at almost 8 billion people on the planet. And I like to also think of us as like cells. We're just dividing. And for those of you who want like 10 kids, I mean, first of all, good for you, but that is dividing, it's essentially dividing yourself into 10 mini yous, which will then reproduce after that, which will then reproduce after that. So we have this ongoing sort of pattern of more and more people, and we're living to longer ages. So, but what are these limits to growth? Boop, 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 boop. Oh, keep touching my face. There you go. So a consequence of exponential growth rate is that the time it takes to add a particular number of humans to the population is becoming shorter. It took 123 years to add 1 billion, but 24 to add 2 billion. So what that's saying is it could take 2 years to add another 3 billion here, just in a few decades, probably. The acceleration in growth rate will likely begin to decrease in the coming decades. I wonder why. Despite this, the population will continue to increase the threat of overpopulation. No, wait, did I write this sentence funny? Despite this, the population will continue to increase the threat. Oh, I think I'm supposed to put a comma here. Okay, there's a comma as my mouse. Despite this, the population will continue to increase. The threat of overpopulation remains, particularly because the damage caused to ecosystems and biodiversity is lowering the human carrying capacity of the planet. So here again is the exponential growth graph and the logistic graph. Right now we're in the exponential part of our growing phase because it's just going up. I mean, you can see it visually. See, that's what I went through. Here, you're saying, whoop, this is an exponential growth. We're looking at time for so long where we're increasing, then all of a sudden it's like going to infinity and beyond. It is bonkers. So we're in the exponential phase, but that's got to give. We can't continue that. People will be dying. I know that my generation, there's a lot of people that are like, we don't even want kids. I'm over it. I have cats. I'm happy. So and I mean, it's expensive to have kids. That's a whole other thing. But we're about to reach this carrying capacity because we're also running out of resources. Overcoming density, what is that word? Dependent regulation. So humans are intelligent. We built shelters. We do agriculture. We have domesticated animals for food. We also have a language and a written language, which is super important. So with that, humans have been able to migrate across the world. I mentioned earlier, humans' environment is the entire world. We can do whatever we need to survive in a particular environment because we have the tools and the intelligence for that to happen, right? We've studied and had access to public health care and medicines, which have lowered diseases, which have killed millions of people in the past. Thanks, vaccines. So because of that, we have a reduced death rate due to development of technological advances during the industrial age and after. And again, we're growing a lot older than other generations in the past ever did. So we have all this incredible access, and I'm so grateful we have medical access. Like it's incredible, and some of the technology that we've come up with in medicine. My brother was telling me about this blood cancer person that he's treating with a pill, and he was like, that used to be a disease that had a 5-year mortality endpoint. It's morbid. And he was like, with this pill that we've been prescribing her, she can live 20 to 30 years now. It was a whole thing because apparently she's refusing to take this pill because you have to take it holding a glove. And she's like, but it must be toxic. Like, yeah, it's toxic because it's killing your cancer. It's a whole thing. But like the fact that we have access to that medicine is just unbelievable, right? But it's also making these people's lives live longer. How dare you? How dare you live long? Um, this was an interesting graph. I don't know if I really want to dive into it too much, but it's just the age structure, the proportion of a population in different age classes. So what we're seeing is rapid growth. This is what it looks like, this graph, male and female. We're looking at age 65 up here, so we have less, and then we have age 15 down here. So at age 15, we're looking at rapid growth here. Slow growth is consistent, stable. This one's, oh, and this was from your textbook. I have a lot of questions. It's fine. Age structures. Okay, but this one was really interesting to me. So the percent growth rate of population in different countries around the world. This is growth rate. So the highest growth is occurring in less economically developed countries in Africa and Asia. I'm trying to figure out how to say this. So a lot of these countries do not have access to birth control, to contraceptives, to even something as simple as condoms, because condoms cost money, and a lot of these people are trying to get by. And so this is causing a lot of high fertility and a lot of babies to be born. And so we have these high percentage growth rates in less economically developed countries. And that caused, this is, you guys, I'm not a geographer. That caused countries like China, which this was rescinded a few years ago. I feel like it was like a decade ago now. The single child rule. So in China for, I think since like the 70s, I should have done more research into this. I'm sorry. They had a law where the Chinese population could only have one child. And that was obviously a very difficult thing, but they were finding that they were reaching their carrying capacity in China with high density populations. So they were like, people can only have one child. One child policy. Oh, we talked about that. It smells like burning. Everything in my house is turned off. Must be somewhere outside. So what are long-term consequences of exponential human population growth? We have talked about this now. Food availability. That's probably the biggest thing. Think about, I mean, I've flown over the US before. I don't know if y'all have. And you go through the Midwest and it's just all farmland. That farmland is only going to grow so much food. And this is also why climate change is going to be such a problem, because if you remember the documentary I made you watch, Leo's documentary, they were talking about how months and months of farming that rice was destroyed in a night because of these flooding events that were caused because of climate change. And that's a huge problem with crops now. It was a huge problem 10 years ago when that documentary came out, but it's a huge problem now, and it's just going to get worse. So food availability is going to go down, right? And population is going up. So this exponential growth is going to hit its plateau very soon, I guarantee you. But the other consequence is the change and degradation of the natural environment. We have a housing problem here in Bellingham, where more and more people are coming to Bellingham, trying to boost the economy, but there's nowhere for them to live. So they busted out a bunch of, I live in a wetland. It's beautiful. I love it. But okay, it really smells like burning. Hold on. I gotta pause because I gotta figure this out. How do I pause this? My house might burn down. It probably won't, but False alarm. One of my neighbors is barbecuing something that smells delightful, but all I was getting for a second was smoke. So, okay. Um, did I skip ahead? Oops, I went too far. Okay, yeah, but they're breaking down a bunch of houses, or they're breaking down a bunch of natural environment just north of me, and they're building like all of these new condos, and they're going up really fast, and they're like the cookie cutter ones that are like this skinny, so they're going to be miserable to live in. So just the idea of being able to build more houses or tearing down other um, areas, natural areas for more farmland so that we can hopefully get more food availability, that's all going to change and degrade the natural environment. So these are going to be problematic for the future. Can we moderate population control? China tried this. Sure, I guarantee you somebody did a study on it. I didn't even think to look, but I don't know if it helped or hurt. It's a difficult thing to mandate. Like, how do you how do you enforce that? I know they did, but they also are in a completely different political regime than we are. You can't necessarily enforce that in a democracy. And so that is really difficult. But one of the things, like I sort of mentioned earlier, is my generation in particular um, aren't having kids. So many of my friends are like, fuck that. I don't want kids. I have cats. I'm living my best life. Or a lot of my sister did this. My sister was like, I only want one kid because that's all I can afford. So my sister had a single child, and then her husband went and got snipped, so they can't produce anymore, and that was their decision. But having a single child in and of its own is so expensive. So having access to birth control and access to women's health and sort of having the availability for that bodily autonomy is so important for people of my generation, but it's also going to help moderate that population control. And I do see a particular political party really trying to boost birth rates in the US. And I think it is there what I've I have heard, I am no population ecologist, but I have heard that one of the reasons behind this is because the economy needs more workers eventually. And they want people to have kids so that eventually these kids will grow up and they will fill all of these empty vacant spots in big corporate gigs. And I'm like, listen, if you don't want kids, don't have kids. I can't afford a child. I teach in environmental science online, which I love, you guys. I love this class so much. And that's why I do it, because I've done jobs that I hate and I have to do a job I love. And I love this. But like, they're expensive. I'm worried. I'm honestly like one of the reasons I'm earnestly worried about the state of the world in 50 years when my child would be grown, right? So moderating the population, I think a lot of our generation and your generation, I imagine you all are a generation below me. I'm a millennial. I don't know if you could tell. I'm sure you could. Uh, but a lot of your generation too is I've heard are very much like, I don't want kids. Just snip my ovaries now. So I think it's sort of growing into generation and generation of birth control and access to women's health. Community ecology. I don't know how much more we have. You guys can watch this on 2 times speed and make fun of my stream of consciousness. I worked 13 hours yesterday, you guys. I am delusional. Uh, okay. Oh, I'm not even on the right. I was trying to look to see how far, but I'm not on the right uh, presentation. Okay. So populations of one species never live in isolation from populations of other species, right? Wolves and rabbits and squirrels and birds, they all live in the same ecosystem. You learned about that 2 modules ago. The interacting populations occupying a given habitat, they form an ecological community. The number of species occupying the same habitat and their relative abundance is known as the diversity of the community. Antarctica obviously has low species diversity. They have an abundance of species there, don't get me wrong. But you could probably count on a single sheet of paper, oh, there's penguins and there's whales and there's fish and there aren't any polar bears in, are they in Antarctica? Oh God, I should know that. I don't know. Versus the Amazon rainforest. And I heard somewhere that they actually have no idea how many species are in the Amazon rainforest because not only are they evolving into new species, and then species are dying out, but there's just no way to go into that amount of forests and track all of those species. So huge high diversity species in the rainforest. Predation and herbivory. So there are a couple different models pertaining to how some of these ecosystems keep populations in check, right? So this one in particular, this is the predator-prey relationship. This is the snowshoe hare, which is the red, and the lynx population in northern Ontario. And this is an example of population and prey. So they did population measurements, density measurements of these different species. And what they found was about the time that one species went up, the other one would too. Because all of a sudden, these lynxes were found food. They were like, yeah, lots of food. But then, because the lynxes found an abundance of food, they were eating more and more. They were, I guess, multiplying more because they could have more babies, which means they were eating more and more food, which means that the hare was going to decline, which in turn made the lynx decline, right? Because all of a sudden, oh, no food. And then it would happen again. So we have this like cyclical simulation, this pattern where one species erupts, which is great. And it allows another species to increase because they have an abundance of food, but it will eventually cause that species to fall because this here, boop, 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 is probably their carrying capacity for the lynx. This looks like the highest peak. So this here is their carrying capacity. Likewise, this is the hare's carrying capacity. That's as high as they can go before they decline in population. Defense mechanisms. Oh, I'm getting close to the end. Okay. Against predation and herbivory. So evolution and adaptations have evolved, for lack of a better word, with a lot of these species. This is, what is this? A locust tree uses thorns. I don't know if y'all see all the blackberry bushes around here oh, it started raining. Oh, that's lovely. I say that all of Bellingham got flooded yesterday. It's fine, but I love the rain. All of the blackberry bushes in August just explode. I know they're considered a weed. I love blackberries, but and they have adapted these thorns. They're very painful to keep prey away. Same with these guys, which are foxglove. Oh, the foxglove. Yeah, these are poisonous. Don't eat a foxglove. And you can vomit and hallucinate and convulse and die when consumed. So these have, but I say this, they're bright and they're colorful, and you're like, why would they be this bright and colorful if we're not supposed to eat them? They're bright and colorful for the pollinators. So the bees are coming in, they're like, yeah, look at all this honey, the bees won't die. And then they pollinate more, and then that's how these guys reproduce. But we would die if we ate them. So don't eat a foxglove. And then animal characteristics that have adapted these defense mechanisms against predation and herbivory to help sustain their community. This is what we're going at. Sorry, I felt like this was sort of, okay, why are we talking about defense mechanisms? This is how they protect themselves as a population to maintain their amount, the numbers, right? So they require and adapt these defense mechanisms to keep their community and their population growing continuously, because otherwise these guys would be eaten. So stick bug. Oh, I love stick bugs. We have them out here. I want to find them in my thicket, in my wetland, so bad, and I have yet to find one because I think they're so cool. But stick bugs look like sticks. That's probably why I haven't found one. And chameleons. This is a tropical one, I guess. These guys can change color. I volunteer at Padilla Bay, and we have octopi there. Not right now. And they change color so fast to blend in with their environment. It's so cool to watch. Maybe I'll put a video up of Hank, our old octopus. He died, unfortunately, but he would change colors like that. It was the coolest thing. Competitive exclusion principle. Boop, boop, boop. So this states that two species cannot occupy the same niche in a habitat. We'll talk about what that means because that's confusing. So different species cannot coexist in a community if they are competing for the same resources. If there is an overlap in resource use and therefore competition between two species, then traits that lessen reliance on the shared resource will be selected for leading to evolution that reduces the overlap. If either species is unable to evolve to reduce competition, then the species that most efficiently exploits the resource will drive the other species to extinction. So I want you to think about this whole slide. And I want you to think about how humans have now taken over the entire planet as their environment, and we use all of these resources. want you to think about what this means for humans and other ecosystems. And no, it's not a happy thought to have, but it's realistic and it is happening. We are the dominating species that occupy the same niche as other species and habitats. Sometimes that is a physical habitat in terms of I took over this wetland in my house, in my apartment that was built here, that took over an animal's house. We see squirrels back there all the time, little birds, deer sometimes. I saw a coyote back here one time. It was pretty cool. But I have taken the space and a lot of space because we live in an apartment. I don't, these guys live in little holes in wood, but we have taken up a bunch of space here. So that's an issue, is just taking up physical space in a habitat versus the food in a habitat, in the ecosystem as a whole. We are taking food from other organisms who need to survive on that food as well. And because we are the dominating species, we are driving a lot of animals to extinction. Let's just move on. Think about that. So this is an example with, I think, bacteria. Oh yeah, this is cells. So these grow well independently on their own, you can see. But when they compete for the same resources, we see that cadatum, I don't know. It dies out because the Aurelia flourishes and beats this guy out for all of the resources. So now this guy has no resources and this guy is boosting up. So this is an example of oh God, I just keep moving my face around, of competitive exclusion principle. And in a darker sense, it's humans. But what about something pleasanter, like symbiosis? So you guys, I'm sorry, I'm just moving my face around. So close long-term interactions between the interactions of different species is symbiosis. And there are different types. So commensalism, yeah, I said that right, is when one species benefits from a close, prolonged interactions. Oh, I went too fast. I thought there was pictures. Like nesting birds in trees. So birds benefit from the shelter and from the food, like insects from that tree. But trees don't really have a benefit. They're like, oh, you're here, whatever. They don't add, they don't take away, they're just there. Mutualism is when two people benefit. One example is the remora and the manta ray. So remora is like a suction fish. It's like a what's the word? Section fish is the best word I'm going to come up with right now. And it latches onto the manta ray for protection. And it doesn't bother the manta ray. The remora will clean parasites off the manta ray, and the remora in turn gets protection from the manta ray for its big size. That is a mutualistic symbiosis. And then there's parasite. Actually, technically, fun fact, pregnancy is considered parasitic. Because parasite is defined as an organism that feeds off another without immediately killing the organism it is feeding on. The parasite benefits, but the host organism is harmed. One logical version of this is tapeworms in humans, which is fun. But technically, humans and pregnancy is a form of parasitic symbiosis. And that's because you have this little critter inside you and it is growing and it's taking all your nutrients. And this person, maybe not every time gets harmed, but my sister developed gestational diabetes because of her pregnancy. Some people get really sick and are bedridden through their pregnancy. It's not very fun. They're not all bad. Babies are cute, but technically, definition-wise, they can be considered a parasitic symbiosis. Characteristics of communities. I'm just sort of flying through random ones. This was what your book went through, so I just kind of followed the headlines and went with it. Biodiversity and species richness. It's a term that is used to describe the number of species living in a habitat or another unit. And it just so happens to correlate with latitude. Again, latitude are the lines that go this way. Boop, boop, boop. Hopefully you can see my mouse. It goes left to right, right? This is the lines of latitude. Longitude's up and down. The greatest species richness occurs near the equator, and the lowest richness occurs near the poles. And that has to do with precipitation and temperature, and also consistent sunlight. Foundation species. Oh, these are fun. So this is the base or bedrock of a community having the greatest influence on its overall structure. Primary producers and so they're usually primary producers and they typically an abundant organism. They may physically modify the environment to produce and maintain habitats that benefit the other organisms that use them. In this case, they showed coral reef. But of course, I'm going to bring in my own personal anecdote to this. So when COVID happened, I thought the most fascinating part about what was happening with COVID was that the people that had to continue to work through COVID were the essential workers. And those essential workers were our grocery store workers, were our doctors, were our a lot of our restaurant people were still working. My husband was working in a restaurant at that time, and he was still working. Basically, if you weren't in a corporate setting that made millions and millions of dollars, you were considered an essential worker. And in fact, I saw a news outlet. See, I'm spewing this. I should have a source, but essentially, they were saying that the people that were continuing to work through this pandemic, putting their lives on the line through this pandemic, were people making minimum wage. They were the foundation species, in my opinion. They were the base and bedrock of COVID. They were running the grocery stores. They were running the shops that needed to stay open so that people could have access to food, to healthcare, to the essentials, right? That's what I thought of when I saw this. I was like, oh my God, those were the essential workers in COVID. We're foundation species. They're the most important part. And probably get the least amount of attention and grace for that. If you were an essential worker during COVID, thank you. I was a student, and a barber. So I was not an essential worker. Keystone species. This is one whose presence has inordinate influence in maintaining the prevalence of various species in an ecosystem. So in this case, it's this is just an ochre star. So we have these in this area too. They're so cool. They're purple. These guys are actually purple because of the barnacle they munch on. Turns them purple. And sea stars are really important because they eat so many different species that maintain. So they eat the clams and the shellfish that maintain that population density, keep those down as well, and the other critters. The otter that I brought up too, yes, otter would definitely fall into. So the sea otter that they added into the Monterey Bay, also a keystone species, because all of a sudden that helped level the species of the urchin, which were killing the bull kelp. So it really balanced out that ecosystem, and so they were able to help sort of preserve that ecosystem as a whole. Community dynamics. These are the changes in community structure and composition over time, often following environmental disturbances such as volcanoes. Hey, remember when you talked about Mount St. Helens in ecosystems? I had to think about that. Earthquakes, storms, fires, and climate change. Communities with a relatively constant number of species are said to be at equilibrium. But it's dynamic, with species identities and relationships changing over time, but maintaining relatively constant numbers. So think about too, how if one animal isn't getting enough food, they might have to change their diet entirely to another animal or organism in that habitat. So this equilibrium is going to change based on adaptations, environment, climate change, or like with Mount St. Helens, when Mount St. Helens erupted and changed a bunch of the ecosystems in that area, a lot of animals had to adapt and change the equilibrium dynamic of those species and that population. Primary succession. This occurs when new land is formed. For example, following the eruption of volcanoes such as Kilauea on Hawaii Island. As lava flows into the ocean, new land is continually being formed. The Big Island of Hawaii gains approximately 32 acres of land a year, which is pretty cool. Because Kilauea, if you're not familiar, has been constantly erupting since 1980. In 2019, I think it was the last. It was a big eruption, and I remember that was the year that the fissures opened up on the eastern side of the island and destroyed entire communities. That lava pardon me, that lava moved so slowly that nobody was killed, but it burned down people's houses. That's not what this slide is about, but it was my fun anecdote because you're getting those. Weathering and other natural forces break down the rock enough for the establishment of hardy species such as lichens and other pioneer species. So these are succulents. Sorry, I knew that word was going to come. These are succulents, and they don't need a whole lot of water, and they can grow in really hostile environments. So this is the lava flow from Hawaii. It's just basalt, and these guys can grow kind of in the cracks as the rock is eroding and becoming soil. Secondary succession. Secondary succession is seen in oak and so we're starting with a pioneer species. Again, this would be the first species of population of plants in one area. So that's a pioneer species. And then you have an intermediate species, like shrubs and pines and young oak. And eventually you're going to get to a very healthy, in this case, you're going to get to a very healthy forest where you have these old growth trees and you have new growth trees and you have shrubs and you have bushes. And these are going to maintain stable until the next disturbance, which in this, again, scenario is probably going to be a wildfire. Especially as climate change is happening, wildfires are going to grow more and more prevalent. We did it. We made it. So I think these last few slides were how populations come to be, right? I did not specify that. I went with what your book said, and this was all part of that chapter. But this is how populations begin, and they grow. And I really wanted to focus in on human, and your book talked a lot about plant, just to like not talk only about human populations, but obviously I wanted to come back to that a lot. Okay, let's talk your homework in lab. I'm really excited about this week. So I know that you guys just had so much to do, and I apologize for that a little bit, but you have had 2 weeks to do module 4. You just did the midterm. Hopefully you're doing the midterm. You have 3 more hours to do it. 2 hours and 48 minutes actually right now. To do the midterm, you have to, I guess you have another week to do your project, which don't forget to email me your project ideas, please, so I can approve them. But you have another week to do that. I think that was it. Module 4. I feel like, am I missing something? Those are the big ones. If I remember, I'll make an announcement. This week, you have homework and lab. So I brought up your lab first because, first of all, I'm super stoked about your lab. I would also like to apologize about Symbio, but I'm actually really glad that nobody liked it. I think 2 people on the quiz were like, "Oh, it was fine. I loved it." I'm really glad you did. I will say I think one of you who did love it was particularly mostly fond of just the interactive part, right? It wasn't necessarily Symbio itself, but the interactive part of doing something for your lab instead of just looking at data or writing a paper, whatever. And so I agree with that. Like I did Symbio kind of hesitantly, mostly because I was like, well, I wanted you guys to have an interactive lab because that's the best part about lab science is doing something interactive, not, oh, I have another paper, right? So that was the intent behind it. But Symbio crashed and burned, which was fine because I 100% hated that I could not do the lab myself. So I build all of this curriculum myself, but I have to be able to do it so I know A, how to help you, but B, also even what is it about? And I want to make sure it is important to what we are doing. So you were supposed to have another Symbio lab this week. But, oh, that's the other thing you had to turn in was the Symbio alternative lab. Anyways, but you're supposed to have one this week, and so we're not going to do that. But I found another interactive lab. Hold on one second. I got to pause. Okay. Sorry. I wanted to make sure I had the labs pulled up before I started chatting about it. Okay, so and on my laptop too. I didn't want to sit here for 5 minutes from my laptop. So Symbio failed. And I apologize. And I got some really great feedback regarding Symbio, and actually my favorite comment, I brought it up here because I thought it was hilarious. It was a violent and chaotic struggle. I was fighting with a robot that was smarter than me. You know who you are. I laughed out loud when I saw that. So I get it. Symbio's not going to work. But let's talk about these really cool interactive labs I found that are free online. And I did them today, and I'm very pleased with it. So you're going to do two. There's two interactive labs. They don't take very long. There's questions on the first one, and then the second one, oh, hopefully it downloads better than that. You have a table. So the first one is logistic growth. You're going to look at a population. So it doesn't matter the population, what it is. And you're looking at two different populations. You're looking at red population and blue population. And you're mostly going to change. So it gives the instructions step by step on the lab, but I just wanted to walk through it with you here. So you're mostly going to be changing this number here. I think that's all you change, actually, is this number. I highlighted the ones you change. Yeah, so you're just changing this one here to, I think, 50, and we're going to do one that's not on there. We're going to do 15. I don't have 15 there. The first thing you're going to do after you hit that number is you're going to set it up, and you're going to notice you now have 15 dots over here. Blue is always going to have 5. That's our control, and I did that on purpose. So you're not going to touch anything with blue. And then you're going to hit go, and you're going to look at population size, and you're going to look at population growth rate. I don't care about this. This is just essentially talking about, so per capita growth rate, this is talking about the resources essentially that these populations are going to have. It's kind of depressing. But here we're seeing a rise in our red population, and then it's teetering off at the, this is embarrassing. I want to say critical point, but I feel like that's wrong. Carrying capacity. I apologize. Again, I'm in a state of delirium. And it's just going to keep going. And for every single one of your runs, so this is how many runs you're going to do. These are the numbers I want you to run in there. You're going to stop it at 500 years. So when you see it hit 500, stop it. And then it's going to ask some questions like, okay, where do the red and blue meet? And you can drag this guy along. Oh, at 478 years, right? It's going to ask about shapes. It's going to ask about what the red line is doing versus the blue line. So that's this one, and you're going to do it a couple times. What I will say is, so you can just jump in there and just add a different number, but you have to hit setup. If you just hit go, it's just going to keep going. So you have to hit setup, so it sets up to start at the 300, and then you go again, okay? Really cool. I think it's really... when I did it and I looked at the different numbers, what this did was really intriguing and really interesting. So, and you'll look at that and see what that does. I really liked this one. This one was fun. You do have to do some math for this one, and I kind of apologize, but I think this one's funner. So for this one, we're estimating a population. Remember how I showed you my quadrats? You're going to do the same thing. This guy. So this was me estimating populations, but you're going to do the same thing doing this. So we're gonna, hold on. Okay, it's a little bit different. So the setup and go are now over here. You're gonna go. So these are tadpoles. I didn't know what they were at first, but they're little tadpoles. What you're gonna do is we're taking them out with a net and we're putting them into a sample bucket. So you're gonna do, dip net. And now we have a sample in our bucket. Oh, we have 25 fishies in our little bucket. And you're going to write that down. And I did the first one for you because I didn't want it to be too confusing. So the first one in this table, I did, here are the parameters that you're going to follow. And I did that. So the green, oops, wrong one. I apologize. Oh no, I deleted it. Hold on. I gotta pause again and bring it back up. And, okay, I'm so sorry. I'm back. Okay, so don't exit out of that, McHugh. We go. We dip net. We have 34 now, right? Just keep hitting the wrong one. And I put it in sample 1. In the same swimmy, we're going to dump these back. So we have the same population back. So we release. They're back in the regular population. We're going to dip net again. And you'll notice it's a different number that we got this time. So we got 30 this time. That's what I would write here. Obviously, when I did this earlier to write your assignment, I got 29. Okay, I did that twice. We're going to release it. We're going to dip net a third time. Oh, 38. I could write it in my third place here. And then we're going to average that out. So 37 plus 29 plus 42 divided by 3 is 36 fish. And then it tells you the volume of the pond. This is 127.5. It does not give you units. So I have given you units. We're going to pretend that's liters. So this is per liter, or 127 liters. And we're also pretending, because it doesn't say, that this is just a liter. Okay, so a single liter. That makes the math really easy. That's why I did it. So you multiply, literally all you do is you multiply that average by the amount in the water. And that tells us that we're estimating 4,590 fish in the pond. Super easy. What you're going to do for all of these different trials is change some of the parameters. So you're going to look, here are the green that I have highlighted in the green here: pond size, population size, net size. And you can change that base. So medium pond is going to be, oh, that's population size. Large pond, let's look at large pond. Oh, and then I'm here waiting for it to do something. You have to set it up. And now we're at 178.5. What's the small? I don't even know the small. It's 76.5. So make sure you look at the volume. Make sure you're looking at these. Always set up for a new trial and then go. But you can run for the whole trial and do 3 different. You don't want to change, like you don't want to change the entire experiment for the same trial. It's going to be the same trial running. You're just scooping 3 times, scooping, releasing, etc. Okay? Because you're going to scoop a different amount each time. You're going to get the average, and then you're going to write it in here. And then you're going to answer all these questions. I'm really excited. I feel like this will be better than Symbio. I hope it is. Let me know. So that's your lab. Again, I don't think it's necessarily going to take you long, but it'll give you a sense of how populations are teetering off and how we estimate populations in a large group, in a large space, I guess. So that was your lab. In your homework, okay. Your presentations put me to shame for your, I think it was ecosystem, the one I just graded. They were so beautiful, and I feel like you guys obviously enjoyed that way better than you did writing a paper, which I totally get because I do too. So you're going to do another presentation. I kind of wanted this module to be pretty chill after having so much due this week. I wanted this to be kind of an easy peasy thing for you to jump into, because I appreciate all your hard work. So you're going to have a presentation. You're going to instruct. I'm reading instructions. You're going to select one of these organisms here and follow the prompt as you go down. And you're going to do another 15 to 20 slide PowerPoint. What I do want to make note of is when I was grading your presentations, I think the biggest flaws that I saw, or the biggest issues that I saw, were people either not writing enough on each slide, like they're only writing 1 or 2 bullet points with maybe a few words in there. Make sure you're writing at least 6 bullet points to get your point across, with more than 6 words. That's the sort of 6-word rule, or the 6-point rule, is you want 6 bullet points with at least 6 words on them. Another issue, of course, that I saw was too much wording. Listen, you guys, I know that I am the worst example of presentations, okay? I get it. I am very aware of what makes a good presentation and what makes a bad presentation. The difference is I have about 3 days to pull a presentation together to teach you guys something, and you guys have 2 weeks. So do the presentations again. They're really fun to watch, really fun to go through. And I also think it's a little bit better sometimes for you guys to write those out, because then you get the bullet points of the information you're trying to learn, which in the end is the information that you're actually going to retain. Writing a paper, sometimes you're just like spitting out verbiage that I don't think you're always going to retain or remember. So I think this is a really great activity, and it's going to be really great practice for your final project. So that's your homework, your lab. You will still have a quiz following this presentation, the thing I'm doing right now, and you have a discussion as well. And discussion, I really wanted this. You guys have been so good about discussions. Like, I am so impressed. I've been very impressed with your discussions and sort of your interactiveness with each other. And I know I said in one that I would comment on yours, and I just completely forgot to do it because I've been doing other stuff, and I apologize profusely. But I am so proud and so grateful that you guys have pulled yourselves together and done it yourself and commented on each other's discussion posts. So thank you, even if you are doing it last minute, which many of you are. Oh, I know, because I see it on my Canvas page. And then I get the notifications, oh, so and so just turned in their discussion. Like, we have 2 hours before class ends, before the module is over. But you know what? I'll take what I can get, and a an interactive discussion makes me happy. So you'll have a discussion and a quiz. But again, I want it to be pretty chill this week. So whew, that was a lot. That was a lot of stream of consciousness. Um, but it was really fascinating topics. So I hope you got a lot out of that. Just for ending here, I'll show you my baby. That's Harry. Look, he's sleeping. He's so handsome. And then that's Henry in the corner. She was snoring earlier. She makes the cutest little snoring noises. Um, and then she wakes me up at 5 o'clock in the morning by walking on my face. So, so it's a tug of war sometimes with that girl. Okay, reach out if you have any questions or concerns. I will email regarding office hours in the next couple weeks. And please don't forget about your projects. That's all. Thanks, friends. Bye.